Welcome into the latest episode of the Think Deeper podcast. I am not your host, Jack Wilkie, in case you haven't noticed yet. I'm one of your hosts, Will Harib. I'm here with Jack Wilkie and Joe Wilkie. We are about to get things started with this week's topic, but before we do, wanted to ask you two gentlemen, for anybody that hopefully listened to the first two episodes that came out this year, we were discussing the idea of goals, the idea of kind of New Year's resolutions, seeking to improve ourselves both physically and spiritually. And at the end of the second episode specifically, we just kind of went through and mentioned some goals that we have, some things that we're working on. So I wanted to ask you guys before we get into our topic today, how are those goals coming for our audience? Refresh their memory on what those goals are and how you're doing so far.
It's getting there for me. One of my big ones I highlighted was I wanted to follow Daniel's example in prayer, morning, noon, and night, 3 times a day. That midday one is so hard, and on paper it sounds so easy, and it's one of those things where it's like, how am I not getting that done? But in today's world, one of the hardest things you can do is just stop. Put your work down, put your social media down, put your things that you have to do down and do that. And so I'm building that habit, but it's taking some time. And it's one I really encourage everyone to do because there's so many more things you can pray about when you get those extra ones in. You can make the morning prayer about one thing, the midday prayer about something else, and at night. And so it's coming along, but it's taken a while to build a habit.
I got to be honest, it's going pretty well this year. I'm a little shocked. I had COVID at the beginning. That obviously, when you're laying in bed or just feel like garbage, it doesn't help as much. But at the same time, it's going well. The prayer has gone well. My mother-in-law for Christmas got me one of those daily Kairos prayer journals, and that's really helped. So my wife and I have been waking up early and doing that together. We do our Bible study. And so that's been going well. And then as far as the working out, could be better, but I'm still had a pretty good week last week, and we're starting to roll on that and get into a rhythm. So I'm pretty happy with how the year so far, first month plus is progressing. So Will, how about you?
First of all, well done, gentlemen. That's awesome. For me, it's fairly well. I'd give it 75 to 80% going well. My goal is 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, 30 minutes of exercise, and then Bible study for at least an hour every day. And I'm averaging out to about missing 1 day a week, which is not great. I'd of course rather be hitting all 6 days, but 5
days is pretty good.
Yeah.
Starting off.
Yeah. So I'm fairly happy with it. Obviously still leaves me room for improvement. We're only here at the end of January. So going pretty well, but,
well, if you're listening along, these goals don't take root overnight. That's something my wife and I were talking about recently was you get in that habit of, well, I got this far. I didn't get there. I guess I'll give up. If you're in like a daily Bible reading plan or just any spiritual goal that you might have, our listeners, we hope some of you maybe took some of that up that we talked about. Okay, you've missed days on your Bible reading plan. Get up tomorrow and read it. Yeah, don't quit. You're closer to building a habit than you were on January 1st, and that's the ideal.
Yeah.
My working out hasn't been perfect, but you know what? You take it a day at a time. Try to establish those rhythms. I found, as a quick side note, and I don't know that we got too much into this briefly because this is not what today's topic is about, but rhythms really do help. It's not necessarily about at 7:30 in the morning, I'm going to do this. It's more, hey, I get my coffee in the morning, I do my workout, I do my prayer. And then after that, I know that it's time. I put my workout shoes on. I know that it's time for workout. That may happen at 9 a.m. That may happen at 7 a.m. It may happen, whenever that is, it's more of a rhythm. It's less of a timing.
The same.
The pattern is the same. And that has helped me. So anyway, just thought I'd add
there you
that.
go. There's some tips for you guys. Again, that's what we talked about the first two episodes. And again, here we are at the end of January, kind of a review. And like Jack said, hopefully you guys are, it's always good to make sure and set, goals to improve yourselves, again, whether it be exercise, diet, but obviously more importantly, spiritually, whether it be daily Bible reading, daily prayer, and whatnot. So very well done, gentlemen. Let's go ahead and get to our topic for today. Jack, why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction into what we're going to be discussing today?
Our topic this week is An interesting one. I hope so. I hope we always pick interesting topics, but this is a very hot topic, one that has had a lot of buzz. I wrote on it at focuspress.org recently. You can go check out the article. It's the topic of Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism. It's a phrase that you hear more and more all the time, and if you search it, there's all kinds of articles. I mean, it's not just something discussed in churches. It's Time Magazine has articles on it. NBC has articles on it. NPR, all the major news networks about the threat of Christian nationalism or the evil, the danger of Christian nationalism. And so I, was in reading about it and listening to things about it, I thought, okay, well, let's dig into this. What is the issue with it? And so I know you guys have been reading on it. Let's talk about why we're talking about this, I guess. What we'll start with.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, as I know you just wrote an article about it, but at least from my perspective, when reading articles, seeing headlines or whatnot about it, it seems like it's one of those things that no matter what article you read, it mostly has a bad connotation. That phrase, Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of articles where it's like, okay, well, let's look at the good and the bad, or well, here's the pros, here's the cons. It's mostly all bad if you read these articles. Again, at least that's what the articles seem to indicate. It's one of those things that no matter who you read, it's got bad connotations. And as somebody who tries to typically challenge traditional thinking, for me, whenever there's something that it's like, okay, everybody's saying this is bad or everybody's saying this is good, my tendency is to go, okay, well, maybe we need to look into that a little further. If everybody's saying it's bad or everybody's saying it's good, has that been your reaction for the most part, or at least the way you've seen it whenever you've looked online and things?
I think from this side, looking back, that's a good way of putting it, is you can look and go, wow, all of it is one-sided, and some things, there is only one side to an issue, but on the other hand, people that don't usually agreed that this is bad. And that's always something that's kind of interesting. And so you look at that, and I remember the first time reading something that gave a positive light to Christian nationalism was like, wait, can you do that? Is there a positive side?
Is that allowed?
Right. Yeah. And so it drives you down this rabbit hole.
So I think one of the reasons why we want to dig into it right now is we just passed January 6th, the anniversary of the storming of the Capitol, and it seems to be back in, I don't know if you want to call it the zeitgeist or whatever you want to say, but really the public consciousness of the dangers of Christian nationalism. And I guess I'll ask Jack, you're more the expert on this, I would say, or at least maybe not an expert, yeah. But in terms of reading for the purpose of this group, you were absolutely the expert. Will and I read a few articles. You've done extensive reading on this, so take that with a grain of salt, the idea of expert. But
yeah, I hate calling him an expert. Come on,
yeah, I am not on this. I'll tell you.
Well,
that.
There's a few other things he's an expert on, but I'll keep the comments to myself. But anyway, has it always been this way? Has Christian nationalism? Because obviously we're seeing it from a very recent part of history that Christian nationalism is now just, it's equated with Hitler, it's equated with the riots, it's equated with racism, it's equated with a lot of different other things. And upon reading this, it became very apparent how much they equate it with everything negative, which to me is a scary, I don't know, like you take a concept that may have some good, may have some bad, but when you equate it with Nazism, it's like, oh, well, I guess it's horrible, and if you support it, then you must support Hitler type of thing. And that's very scary. But has Christian nationalism always been viewed as a negative, or is this a more recent kind of take on this?
Well, and Jack, in answering that question, whenever you answer that question, it might be helpful to go ahead and define Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of anybody who might be listening to this going, I have no idea what they're talking about. I don't know what Christian nationalism is. Please don't tune out. Jack is about to explain what that means.
Right. And that's one of the things I get to in the article was, this is, in certain circles, it is like the hot topic. And I understand, having been on the internet long enough, there's just times where the battle is just raging and people are, just fighting something to the death. And then you get off of the internet and I go talk to my wife or I go talk to somebody at church. Man, have you seen all this stuff about it? They're like, what are you talking about? And,
right.
and like Twitter is its own tempest in a teapot kind of thing. Facebook has its own. The news is its own. If you don't watch the news, sometimes you just don't know what these terms are. And so you might think, well, what does this have to do with anything? The thing it has to do about anything is everybody has a position on it, whether you think you do or not. Because it's tied to Trumpism, because it's tied to the January 6th thing, because it's tied to, right now, right-wing politics. It's what Joe said, is it's kind of become this catch-all term of basically any bad politics that mixes religion in. It's all Christian nationalism, and Christian nationalism's bad, so we have to separate ourselves from all of it. And so, getting to what it is, I gave the Webster's definition in the article, and it was, about viewing one's nation as more important or better than others, but also loyalty and being proud of one's nation. And so there's parts of that where you can say, well, loyal to your nation, proud of your nation, okay. Viewing it as better or more important, that could go a bad way, that could go a good way. In that, if you think it's more important in that basically we can do whatever we want, we're chosen by God, therefore anything we do is justified, and there kind of is that out there. That's not good. And so it's that kind of thinking that leads to people storming the Capitol. It leads to, the kind of Christian where you go in on a Sunday, maybe before the 4th of July, and all the songs are about America and patriotism, rather than singing about Jesus. That's that kind of Christian nationalism. It's not good. The problem is, and as Joe kind of got at with the question, that's a pretty recent definition. Really, throughout Christian history, as far as I can tell, and I, in going over this, found quotes from Aquinas, Augustine. So we're talking way, way, way back. This is just kind of standard. In fact, it's very new, very postmodern of us, very individualistic of us to get away from the idea of nationalism itself and the idea that the church has a duty to, be a church can support the good of a nation, and the Christians have a certain interest to their nation as well.
And that's something that I was going to bring up too. Is you think about the nationalism as the way in which you just defined it, that being extremely loyal, proud of your country, but also believing your country is greater, better than other countries. You apply the word Christian right before it. So you got nationalism and you got Christian nationalism. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, because you're more well read on this subject, but to apply the word Christian right before nationalism, to make up the phrase Christian nationalism, seems to imply, again, a lot of different definitions, but some people would define it as the belief that America is, we've always heard the phrase a Christian nation, right? Mm-hmm. America is a Christian nation. There are some people that would put their Christianity on an equal playing field with their Americanism.
Right.
And that again, is one definition. I think all of us would probably agree. If those are on the same playing field, that's not a good thing. But that is one way that people define this idea of Christian nationalism is you've got your Christianity, you've got your Americanism. Those are on the same playing field. You should be working to promote both of those things, again, on an equal playing field. Is that a fair characterization of the way some people would push that?
Yeah, and again, I think we would agree that a lot of times what is being discussed, or at least being pushed forward as kind of the face of Christian nationalism, is not good. Equating the success of America with the success of Christianity, and basically we need to further America because that furthers
rather than furthering the gospel.
Yeah,
right.
And if America falls apart, then the church falls apart. We don't believe that, and that's true. And of course, we're not advocates for turning Sunday worship into a flag waving rally. We're not advocates for storming the Capitol. And so all of that we would agree with. The problem is you kind of go to the other side of the spectrum, which is Christians have no identity in their nation. Christians have no connection, no people, no place, nothing like that. And honestly, the opposite of Christian nationalism isn't some neutrality. That's usually how these things get painted of, oh, I don't do that, I'm neutral. There's no neutral. Everybody believes something. The opposite is usually Christian globalism or even Christian imperialism. And
Can you define those?
Okay, so nationalism, like economically, is we're going to keep our business here. We don't want to ship jobs overseas. We want to,
Sure.
make a country where for the people here, to have jobs, to be able to work, to not bring in cheaper labor as competition for them. You always hear that they're stealing our jobs. Well, they might not be stealing your jobs, but they might be providing a competitive lower wage. There is a lot of things around that to be discussed. And so the other side of that, the globalism, and what you see with a lot of Christians is basically, we're citizens of the world. We have to do good to all people. We can't prioritize people of one nation over another. And so, love your neighbor means love your next door neighbor as much as it means love the guy across the world. Yes, but politically, sometimes those interests clash, right? Sometimes, helping the person across the world or bringing in, things like that. The immigration, I guess, discussion might hurt your next door neighbor, might lower wages or whatever else. And I mean, this is something that it sounds difficult because the easy answer, the emotional answer, is always the one that we're drawn to, right? Let's just help everybody all the time.
Right.
But you can't do that. There are real life costs to things like that. And so it's analyzing these things and saying, you know what? And this is, as I said, Christian history has this view of, you do have basically, when you drop a rock in a pond and there's the ripples that go out, you have ripples, rings of loyalty or duty, right? You have duty to your church family first, to your physical family second, but then also to your immediate local neighbor first. It's a lot easier to love your neighbor across the world who you don't know is a nameless, faceless person than it is to love your neighbor who lives next door to you. And so, again, Christian history holds love your neighbor next door. You do have a duty to your countrymen. You do have, something to him. You share something with each other, and you shouldn't deny that. And I think that's one of the things that it comes down to. There's this form of study, this corner of theology called two-kingdom theology. There's the spiritual kingdom and the earthly kingdom, and the church exists in both of them. And so it has different duties to both of them. As a church, we have our duty first to God, but then we have duties to the spirit, the earthly, render to Caesar unto Caesar's, all of those things.
Sure.
The other view of it is not that the church is in afoot in both worlds. It's that the church is a solely spiritual kingdom. Governments are a solely earthly kingdom. And the two don't mix at all. And I think, like Christian anarchism, David Lipscomb, that's kind of this idea that basically the church and the governments will always be at war with each other. And so to be a Christian nationalism is basically to cross lines in the war. You're mixing your side, you're trying to ally with your enemy. And I think that's why some people view it as so objectionable.
There's a lot to take in there.
I kind of went through a lot of it real quick.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's good because you're defining terms like the globalism. I was thinking as you said that, I wonder how much has changed in the fact that we now can know our neighbors across the sea,
Right.
Like back then, yes, you worried about your neighbor. It was a very localized approach because what were your options? Like, maybe you
couldn't communicate with anybody across the world.
Exactly.
Right.
So you think about your local community, you think about shopping local and everything else. Well, now so much has changed, and yeah, we have the ability to kind of either visit or see through things like Zoom or get on the phone or write letters or whatever else to people across the world. And on the one hand, I think that's really good. I think it is good to be thinking about the church as a kind of the church is huge, and there's so many blessings to knowing that there are people across the world worshiping every Sunday that believe like us, that we're going to see in heaven, and that's a fantastic thing. But I also wonder if it does kind of take away from, as you talked about, the getting to know your actual neighbor across the street, where we're so focused on kind of the bigger picture of things that we don't. Well, it's also the same of us church hopping. We don't keep things local. Like we will. I don't know. And maybe I'm getting off topic there, but I think the way we view church, the way we prioritize things, the way we prioritize each other, and the way we prioritize God has kind of changed based on our availability to to other places in the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. It does. And to go off both of those points that y'all both made, to what's easier? Is it easier to say, well, everybody's my neighbor, I have to love the person, thousands of miles away just as much as I love the person next door? If you pay attention to the people who normally say that, typically, this is a generalization, but typically, if that's kind of the fallback, those people aren't really doing anything to love their neighbor on either side. It's a lot harder to realize I've got people next door. I've got people in my community. Let me go talk to them. Let me go form a relationship with them. Let me go do my best to spread the gospel to them. That's very difficult to do. That requires getting out of our comfort zone. That requires us, again, maybe doing things that we're not comfortable with, as opposed to just, well, we have to love everybody, and therefore using that as an excuse or justification to not really put ourselves out there in the community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think some of what Joe is getting at as well. I said earlier about individualism. It's a very recent thing, because up until very recently, we identified ourselves with our nation, our people, and that's an okay thing. I had somebody comment in response, God doesn't care if you're this, that, or the, in Galatians 3, that there is neither male nor female, nor slave nor free, nor Greek, nor, and that whole list that he goes through, and that's true, but this is part of the two kingdom theology. In the church, they're in the spiritual, and your value before God is not different. On the other hand, we have the book of Philemon, and what does that show us? Shows us still a slave and a master, and they still had to work out that relationship. Paul didn't tell them, you're not a slave, you're not a master anymore. He writes in 1 Timothy 2 and 1 Corinthians about women and their roles in the church. He didn't say, there's no men, there's no women, everyone gets to do the same thing. And so while our identity in Christ erases some of that, it doesn't erase everything. You still have family. You're still a Wilkie. I'm still a Harrowby. I'm still a Wilkie. You're still a Harrowby.
Reverse that.
Yeah, reverse that. Wrong way. And so that's kind of our individualism, is we want to remove all identity. We want to remove all shared things that we have with people, and that's anti-nature. God made us this way for a reason. God created these things. And again, the Lipscomb thing is kind of, government is only a result of rebellion towards God. This was not God's plan. I've read his book, and he says a lot of good things, but Romans 13 says what it says, that every government that is in power was put there by God. You read about Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel and the way God, pulls the strings with Babylon and Persia and all those things. And so we have to get out of our 21st century individualist, isolated, atomized, living in our own individual pods, separated from everybody, choosing our own associations. You look at the way we talk about family these days. We've talked before about how family gets run down big time. Thanksgiving, Christmas, family are the people you choose rather than it matters who you were born into, and your nation is part of you. It's other countries still call it your motherland, because there is kind of and this is again a Christian thing throughout history. Honoring your father and mother was considered part of, or caring about the people around you was considered part of honoring your father and mother. We have really twisted that on its head and said it's really bad to get caught up in, anything about a nation, that as a Christian, you don't have any identity with the nation at all. And that leads to Will's point of, I just love everybody. That's sometimes an easy way out. Love the person next to you.
It reminds me of, when Jesus is talking about I can't give to my parents. I can't take care of my parents because I gave to the poor, right? I gave to other, and Jesus basically take care of your parents.
Yeah.
You're not.
That's a great point.
Any better because you're taking care of somebody else. You should be taking care of your parents. So yes, I understand you're tithing to God and everything, and that's fantastic. But I think we take that similar approach. But here's where I guess my real problem.
Hold on to your next point. With that, sure. Using that hypothetical, if your neighbor needs $10 or he's going to starve, and then you see a commercial on TV saying somebody across the world needs $10 or they're going to starve, which one do you give it to? I would assume, and I think most people would say, I would go give it to my neighbor. I'll give him $10 or he's going to starve. Welcome to nationalism. That is a degree of this. Now, people don't like that the term can be used for that, but we're going to get to why that's important to keep terms the way they need to be, the way they make terms mean what they mean.
Right, and because we can typically, sorry, Joe, not to cut you
No,
off.
you're good.
Again, with the bad connotation point, we hear nationalism today and we think Hitler.
Right.
We hear nationalism, we think Nazism. Just keep in mind that is an extreme of nationalism. That is not that is not the complete nature of nationalism. You don't automatically jump to Hitlerism or Nazism just by hearing the term nationalism. And I think that, again, to further your point about making sure that we establish definitions and keep them the way that they are, just again, we'll go back to you here in just a second, Joe. But when you hear nationalism, don't automatically equate it with something that is as bad of a connotation as Hitler or the Nazis or Germany back in the 1940s. That is the extreme of nationalism, where you say our country is better than everybody else's, needs to be advanced at the expense of the other countries. Right. That's what happened in 1940 with Nazi Germany. That's not what we're talking about here today, because obviously anybody knows that's not something that's good. That's not something that anybody needs to be an advocate of.
Right.
Right. Can we, though, admit that America thriving has, in the past, this is not always the case, but in the past, has furthered Christianity around the world? Like, when America is being
said, we send a whole lot more missionaries than North Korea and Iran do.
Bingo. I mean, that's exactly my point. Is when America is thriving, when America is doing what America ought to do, and being a Christian nation, if you could call it that, which is very tenuous.
It's a stretch now.
Yes, yeah. At this point, very much so. But I think a lot of Christians want to get back to, quote unquote, the glory days, as you might say. But more than anything, what that means to me is getting back to a place where we honor God, we recognize God in the school systems and everything else, which I think are broken, but that's for another podcast or another time. But getting back to, if we were the Christian nation that we used to be, I think it furthers the gospel. It furthers, like with our missionaries, with how many Bibles have we sent around the world? How many people are Christians today because America was thriving and was a Christian nation who had money and decided to send the gospel around the world? I don't think,
and because of the freedoms that America offers.
Correct. Right. So right. I don't think that can be like pushed to the side and been like, well, churches, of course the church is more important. I'm not challenging that the church is more important. Our citizenship is in heaven, of course, but can we also, I guess this is my issue, is it's the either or approach. Like you can't have both. You can't be a very strong Christian whose citizenship is in heaven, but also be a proud American who wants America to succeed, because now they're tying it to white nationalism, like to, where were those riots, with kind of the neo-Nazis type thing.
The Charlottesville thing, yeah.
Yeah, Charlottesville thing. Like they tie Christian nationalism to white nationalism, which again is completely different. But yes, America has helped the world quite a bit, and to see America succeed is a very good thing. And I'm a very proud American who wants to see America succeed, because I do think it helps the spread of the gospel. Doesn't mean America is God's people. The church is, for sure, but the church can function better in a free state, in my opinion.
The Christian nation thing is a very interesting term, because I really, my writing is free to read. It's still posted online, and sometimes I kind of regret that. There's, you learn as you go. But, about Christian nation, I really bristled against that term, and a lot of us do. But, that America's a Christian nation. Like, well, hold on. Look at all the abortions. Look at all the laws on, and even at what we look back as the glory days. There was segregation. There was slavery. There was bad things. And so people go, well, you're just whitewashing history. You're making it all great. No, there's plenty bad there. On the other hand, there's also a lot of good there, and it seems like there's a pull to go one way or another, to focus on, the 1619 Project, basically that America is defined by slavery and racism. It is at its roots. It will never be anything but a racist nation. No. I mean, there's just too much good there. This is a nation that, without getting into all that, that's, again, another episode. On the other hand, there's the pull to go to the other side of, basically, we're all good, and anything bad that happened was oops, or, whatever. No, there was real bad stuff that you need to acknowledge. That's bad. That's part of, if you want to be a Christian nation. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet in this that's really, really important, that gets missed in political discussions, as I said, we are so... Our view is so slanted by our individualism, right? That we view the world through this 21st century individualized frame. The other thing is, we as Americans view it through an American frame. That's the only politics we know. When we talk about Christian nations or Christian nationalism, and as Will said, the Nazi dominant, I'm going to basically push myself all over other people, I think people think that's what you're advocating for with Christianity in America. Christian nationalism is what we should want for every nation. We should want France to thrive and succeed and the people to have a deep-held respect for God. Now, you're never going to have a nation where everybody converts. I get that. But that would be the best thing that could happen for France, is that their laws reflect biblical morality, that the people take on biblical values, that for Zimbabwe, for Thailand, you go around the world and you think the best thing for that nation is Christian nationalism, because we have all this talk about loving your neighbor. Loving your neighbor, so many of the things that come out of a Christian nation, which is, protecting the people and fair living wages and moral things, where your kids don't have drag queen story hour being brought to their library into their schools, where on Blue's Clues, where they're having a drag or a pride parade on a television program for 3-year-olds. And honestly, what people on that are against that push back on Christian nationalism are saying is we're better off now than we were before Blue's Clues put pride parades, or Sesame Street held pride parades on my 3-year-old's television programming. Are we? Now, it doesn't, because then people will say, well, okay, if you fix that, and again, as I've written before, if you get those things off TV, you haven't saved anybody. No, but maybe you've helped.
Maybe you've gotten closer.
Yeah, because the environment that you are in pushes you in one direction or another, and right now it's pushing people farther and farther away from God. And as again, with all the problems of the past, when America was not doing these things, you had more Christian people. Now America is accepting these other things, and this gets to the Romans 13 thing that we have to talk about, that I think is kind of the assumption that gets missed in all this. We, as I said before, we kind of assume a neutrality. We've got our religion, there's other religions, and we're just going to try and do our best, but there's no, anything else. Well, Romans 13 talks about, verse 3, for rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise for the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. That's what a government does. That's what God places them in power to do. And you know what the thing about it is? Every government on earth rewards the good and punishes the evil. What's the difference between all of them? Every government does the exact same thing, or in principle does the exact same thing, rewarding the good, punishing the evil. What makes the difference in how that outcome is?
Whether or not they subscribe to biblical morals,
I would say. The value base. The value base. Nazi Germany was rewarding the good and punishing the evil. Well, to them, the evil was anybody who had Jewish descent. And so we're going to punish them. Where did they get that morality base? Not from the Bible, not from God. And so you want your nation's leaders, and this is what Romans 13 is talking about. Our job is to submit to them. God's job is to keep them in line that they do that. And if they don't do that, they will be punished. They'll be removed. As we see, in the Old Testament happens over and over and over. God expects nations to hold to his values. Well, now you've got Christian nationalism. Not that they have to force everybody to be a Christian, because that's one of the other things that comes out of this is, are they going to force people to go to church? No, but they're going to say this is good and this is bad according to God's standards. Because if they don't do it according to that, they're going to do it according to some standard.
Jack, you think about those prayers that you so often hear, right? God, we thank you that we are able to meet and assemble without fear of persecution.
Right.
For we know that there's other countries where that's not the case.
Right.
It's those other countries that obviously don't have those same freedoms that we have that could use a dose of Christian nationalism, right? It's those other countries that they don't have the same freedoms that we have. Again, you hear those prayers quite often. Thank you, God, that we have the freedom to assemble. There's people that don't. And those countries, those people, again, the ideal scenario, obviously this is idealistic, this is best case scenario, is that they do have those freedoms that places like the United States of America has to offer.
Right. And you people will throw that out. The church does better under persecution. Sometimes, yes. Obviously there's plenty of biblical and early church testimony of that happening. But as I said before, North Korea and Iran aren't sending out tons of missionaries. America is. America's sending out the large bulk of missionaries in the world, okay? And so, we're not better off when we have to hide and sneak and all these things. We're better off when we can openly just go out in public. But then you see, Canada passing stuff about, hate crimes, that if you preach that, if somebody's homosexual, they need to be baptized and not be homosexual, you can be thrown in jail for that. That's not better. And so, but then you come back around to the underlying philosophy of, do we have any reason to expect governments to do these things? We do. That's what Romans 13 is saying, is we have reason to expect. And what it says is God will take vengeance, but it's not, that doesn't mean it's not wrong for us to expect that of them.
And 1 Timothy 2 also makes it very clear at the beginning that we are to be praying for our leaders that we might lead tranquil and quiet lives.
Right.
Not persecuted lives, but tranquil and quiet. We are beseeching God to help governments be in a place where basically we can practice our faith and freedom.
And evangelize.
And evangelize.
The next verse is so that, all men will come to a knowledge of the truth.
Right. So with that being the case, I think zooming out here for a second, the discussion kind of needs to be had of, for those that are listening, in case you're I don't know, maybe agree, maybe you don't. Something that I think we have to do and that everybody has to do is try to remove the emotion from this, because I'm fully aware that by us kind of almost backing Christian nationalism, it sounds ridiculous and wow, how could you say those things? And when you remove the emotion from it, you are able to see that there are some positive aspects here. No, we're not backing January 6th and what happened and saying that's okay. Absolutely not. We're not backing, again, the worst, furthest extent,
the
extremes. Yeah. The problem is, in modern culture, that's what is pushed, is the extreme views. And so we're simply saying, as we look at this, as you talked about, Jack, every country, the world would be a better place if Christian nationalism were everywhere, in my opinion. Now, the Christian nationalism, as we're defining it, which is for a nation to take on Christian values and to believe that Christianity or Christian values are better. I think
God
that
expects of them.
Yes, I was going to say
I don't see how you can. I don't see how you can view that as a bad thing, to be honest.
Right.
And where people say where the church and politics mix, you get politics. Okay, where the church and politics don't mix, you still get politics, enforcing its will on it is a reality of life. And I think one of the problems of these other views is it's denying reality. Right. And this idea that we are, that basically we have to exist as if the state doesn't exist, or the idea that Christianity plus power is not good. And you'll hear people say all the time, Jesus didn't come to take power, Jesus came to give up power. What was the last thing Jesus said on earth? All authority is
given to me.
And when somebody pointed that out to me, it was like, well, he did say that. But the thing that really flipped things on the head for me is Psalm 2, where it's talking about the nations in an uproar. They're taking their stand against the Lord and His anointed. They're going to fight back against God, and basically, God's going to shatter them. God's going to crush them, and that's where you get that psalm that's quoted in the New Testament. You are my son; today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations. He's giving Jesus all of the nations, and this is where your eschatology comes in. What you believe about the end times, premillennial people that believe that there's going to be the 1,000 years of tribulation, and a lot of them believe in like the rapture and stuff like that. They believe that things are going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. God's going to rescue His people out here, and it's just going to go into utter chaos, and then He's going to come back and things are going to be great. Post-millennial believe that there's going to be this 1,000-year reign where things get better and better and better, that Christianity spreads and spreads and gains more and more influence throughout the world, and then Jesus is going to come back when His world has been established. Most of the time in the churches of Christ, most of us, and I believe I am, would be millennial. We don't have a belief of the millennium. We're living in the millennium right now, and so we don't really have a belief about one or the other. But when you run into these things, it's what do you think is going to happen before the end? Do you think it's basically going to be the world is a sinking ship and God's going to get His people off of it and win in the end? Or do you believe that the gospel is going to spread and things are going to continue getting better? Well, Psalm 2 does kind of have lean toward that of he's going to give him the ends of the earth as his possession. But that eschatology is another episode. But the thing that really I'm coming to here is at the end of Psalm 2, verse 12, do homage to the Son, or some versions will say, kiss the Son, that being Jesus, that he not become angry, and you perish in the way. For his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all who take refuge in him. That is what God expects of kings, presidents, all in authority, is that they would bow on their face to Jesus and say, you're the king, not me. You're in charge, not me. This other view of Christians in government, the idea of bringing Christianity into the halls of power, says if the president bows his face before God and says, you're the king, you're over all, I am submitted to you fully in all things, I'm going to govern as you want me to govern according to your standards. And that's not a theocracy, that's not making us follow the old law or anything like that, but just using God as your standard for law. This other view views that as the worst thing that could happen. Oh, Christians in power, don't mix. This is what God says has to happen or they will be shattered. We should probably be rooting for that, shouldn't we? And again, not just for America, for every nation. I want the Prime Minister of England to say Jesus is Lord. You know, Poland literally, in the last 5 years, held an election in their parliament, and it is like nationally passed that Jesus Christ is the King of Poland.
Wow, I did not know
No
that.
way.
Can you imagine saying that's a bad thing? And so when you look at Psalm 2, that's the one that, as I said, I was a Christian anarchist. I said, kind of the same thing, Christians and government don't mix. The government is one realm, the church is another realm. We've got our goals, they've got theirs, we are at odds with each other. And then you see this, and this is what God expects of them. Now, we as the church can't force them to do that, but we want to encourage it because it's what's best for them. Loving your neighbor, the president, would be to tell him, hey, God expects you to submit to him. You should probably do that. Now, they might or they might not, but we shouldn't look at it as a bad thing if they do. Anyway, Psalm 2 is a good one. There's Jeremiah 29 talks about working for the good of the city that you're in. The thing that I get at in the article that really bugs me about this is most of the people, and I'm not going to name check anybody, but there's writings on this, even in the churches of Christ, Christian nationalism, that rip into the idea, talk about how bad of an idea it is, mixing Christianity and government, and the idea of Christianity, being important to America. These are the exact same outlets, and I'm not saying this as a hypothetical, oh, they probably think that. No, these are the same outlets that run articles all the time about how Christianity tells us that we should change the laws in America for social justice.
Social justice, right.
Critical race theory kind of things, which, again, I'm against racism as much as anybody, but there's some really bad ideas out there on these things. Isn't that a form of mixing Christianity and politics? Why is it okay to do it one way and not the other? And this gets to where I want to finish this episode. Why I think it's worth talking about is rescuing the term. Because it's being turned into a weapon to use against any policy that is not in line with what certain... okay, I don't want to use the terms, but we're going to use the terms. The terms are fraught. The terms have a lot of baggage, a lot of bad about them, but they are the terms. Right-wing and left-wing. Basically, if a Christian holds any right-wing policy views, oh, you're a Christian nationalist. Well... Right. Maybe I am. Let's. We can't let it just become a weapon to where anytime somebody says that, they've got this in their bag and everybody goes, no, oh boy, right. Christian nationalism.
They automatically have the upper hand because of that, yeah.
Right. I mean, what do you say when somebody accuses you of being a Christian nationalist? No. Well, now you're on the defensive, and now you can't argue for, well, maybe we should do this. Maybe we really should fight abortion. Maybe the Supreme Court did legislate that gay marriage is the law of the land, but maybe states need to do something about that. Maybe, accepting this insanity and the speech stuff with trans pronouns and all the stuff that's coming down the pipeline, maybe saying, hey, we should try and maybe not let that happen. That's not Christian nationalism. That's God is ruling countries by his hand. This is what he expects. Punish the evil, reward the good.
But that's what culture has come to is, throughout the word bigot, throughout the word homophobic, and, we're just all
Racist.
supposed to, we're supposed to just bow down, like, just because you said it, it must make it so. If you call me a racist or if you call me a bigot, then that must make it so, even though that's not true. But I've won. And as you said, Jack, now we're on the defensive. But in reading for this and kind of trying to understand a little more about Christian nationalism and the way that it's viewed, the Time magazine article for me was, I don't know if scary is the right term, but to me, it shows where things are, which is
ominous.
We're kind of in, what's that?
Ominous.
Yes, ominous. And we're kind of in a place that Christianity is taking a beating. And I feel like this is the new way for us to look at Christianity as bad, or as, well, you got to be careful for those Christian nationalists. Okay, how soon is it that you evangelizing somebody is you pushing your Christian nationalism?
Right.
The same way that me, I don't know, like I'm pushing white nationalism, I'm pushing Nazism, I'm pushing racism, I'm pushing all these other things because I evangelize somebody. I'm telling you, this is coming down the pipeline. And the worst thing is there are thousands and thousands of Christians getting on board with this horrible idea, saying that basically, Christian nationalism, that's real dangerous, that's really scary. In certain contexts, yes, but when we blanket statement, you don't think they're going to use a blanket statement the same way they're currently doing with every other thing, like the bigot and the racism and everything else, so as to win their argument? This is what's coming down the pipeline. So the reason why this matters to me, that we reclaim the term, change the meaning a little bit behind what everybody else sees, and really go back to what it used to mean, is we're in for a rude awakening as Christians if we think that we can say Christian nationalism is a horrible idea. I see the way Time magazine is writing about it. I am telling you, we will not be able to evangelize our neighbors without, and this is already happening, but it's going to get way worse, where they're going to call us Christian nationalists, which is equated with Nazism and everything else. And next thing you know, you're going to have zero ability to do anything as a Christian. You going to church is going to be exercising your privilege, and it's going to be, white nationalism and Christian nationalism, because how dare you, and put your church above a mosque or above whatever it may be. Like, and you go, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would they do that? Because they're doing it all the time. Right. So yeah, it's very scary. It's a slippery slope, I guess, for Christians to get on board with this Christian nationalism is a horrible thing. Pump the brakes on that a little bit, and again, remove the emotion and try to understand the nuance maybe of this difficult situation, because the mainstream is using it for the detriment of Christianity, is what I'd say.
Well, and you think about, again, the equivalency that people are making. Nowadays with cancel culture, the worst thing that anybody can possibly call you is a racist, right? Mm-hmm. You think about sports commentators, you think about, people in the public eye who that is the number one thing. If somebody calls you that, you can kiss your career goodbye. And so they'll do everything in their power to avoid, having somebody use that blanket term of that's just racism or that's your white privilege. You can be
controlled by it. You can be controlled by it. Somebody might call you this, therefore, a bigot, racist,
you need to not do these things. And I think, Joe, your point is excellent. The fact that, it is very easy to see within the next, 5, 10, 15 years, not that far away, people using that Christian nationalism term in the exact same way as just a blanket statement that, immediately causes people to get defensive, immediately causes people to be controlled by not wanting to be called that. And so we're going to avoid doing certain things. Again, you said it, Joe. I don't want to repeat everything that you said. That is the next thing that's on our horizon. If we allow this, just blanket definition of the term without really parsing it, without really saying, hang on, let's actually take a look at the definition rather than just allowing people to twist it, manipulate it, make it mean something that it's not. It's a great point.
And thank you. I appreciate it. That's why this matters, is right. What we're saying. For those listening, go, what's a big deal?
That was one of the comments I got, is it's a loaded term. We need to abandon it. Okay, but then what? And that what you're saying, and Will, what you're saying about the terms being used to control, and push you into a corner, is very much, I'm not a Christian nationalist. Oh, okay, well, what do you believe? I believe this. Oh, yeah, you are. You're not going to escape it. And so, if you think killing 60, 70 million babies is a bad thing, and that maybe we should have laws against it, that Roe v. Wade should be struck down, for the people that need that term, as a rhetorical weapon, you are a Christian nationalist.
Right.
And so your choice at that point goes one of two ways. You can say, I guess I am, or you can say, oh, no, 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 I don't want to be that. No, anything but that. Okay, I'll stop talking about abortion. And you see this happen over and over. You've seen people give up the LGBT thing because you don't want to be that. You've seen people give, and keep ceding ground because, boy, I really don't want to be thought of negatively by those out there. And so, that was the comment I got a few times. Can we just give up the term? Can we use something else? Well, what term are we going to use? And we'll use it.
Because they're going to use it against us.
Right.
Exactly we know that for a fact.
Right. It's not the terms itself. And so you might as well grab the term by the horns, run it back the other way and say, yes, I am. And it's a good thing. It's a biblical thing. It's what God expects of governments. Because it goes back to that idea of, God, the governments are going to reward the good, punish the evil. The most evil thing, the things in our society today that they're punishing versus the things they're rewarding, you can look at it. There is a religion behind it. There's not a neutrality behind it. That's the thing we lie to ourselves all the time. I brought up a few times that there's a neutrality. No, there is a religion behind it. There's secular humanism behind it. There's these anti-God things behind it. It's not good. And so let's advocate for, because it's also part of the love your neighbor thing. If I'm letting a world, if we're on this march to where if my son gets up in a pulpit 30 years from now and says, and just reads through, Matthew 19 about marriage, if he reads through Romans chapter 1 about God gave them over to these perversions and these lusts and all that, and he gets thrown in jail for it and separated from his family and things that are happening in other places around the world, and I could have done something to prevent it, but I didn't, how am I loving my neighbor?
Right.
They let Paul down the basket out of Damascus, right? You don't have to sit there and let it happen. Sometimes, if it can be avoided and you can do good to do so, do it.
Well, and from a common sense perspective, for somebody that's like, well, I haven't really read up enough on this, I'm not well versed in this subject, it is very difficult for me to understand how you can take a look at certain issues, abortion, homosexuality, things that we can look at Scripture and verify should not be happening, right? It doesn't make sense to me how we can take a look at those, again, abortion, homosexuality, those examples. We want those to change, right, for the good. If that takes place because the government changes laws, how is that a bad thing? If abortions, if homosexuality, if, throw anything out there that is anti-Bible, that is anti-biblical, anti-God, we should want those things to change for the good. If that takes place because of the government, that's not a bad thing. And I think that's part of the misunderstanding with the term Christian nationalism. Well, government shouldn't be doing anything with that. Again, those things should be totally separate. Maybe, but to say that, though, the abortion and the things that we see that we want to change, to say that we should avoid the government changing those at all costs doesn't make sense to me. We should want those things to change regardless of whether or not the government's pushing it. And if it is, great.
We get so in our heads about this stuff about, we can outlaw abortion, but it doesn't change the heart behind it. We should be trying to convert all of these women rather than changing the laws. Like, I would love for them all to be converted. We should be trying that. I mean, Will, I think you've taken part in standing outside the Planned Parenthood there in Nashville. I know your dad's done a lot of that, of praying with women, trying to keep them out of there, trying to teach them about Jesus. It's a great thing, but we don't deal with that otherwise. Man, I wish there was no murder, but we shouldn't have any laws to stop it. We should try and really get to the heart of these people.
That doesn't change the heart of the murderer,
right? And this is, again, punish the evil, reward the good. That's what the government is supposed to do, to protect, make it to where you can live your life in safety and peace and tranquility and peace and quiet, so you can practice Christianity, and evangelize, all those things that we've talked about in 1 Timothy 2. If that makes me a Christian nationalist, and if that word, that boogeyman word is going to be used, okay,
so be it.
Just accept it. And again, even the people who are so against it aren't as against it as they think they are. They advocate that our nation should have such and such laws and should change in such and such ways, because,
and that's my point. Yeah.
Right.
Because they throw out the social justice buzzword.
Right. Everybody's got a value set. Everybody thinks that value set should be applied. Why not the one who actually rules the whole world and will hold people to account to it? But I think the biggest thing, and this is I guess we'll finish here because it goes toward what Joe was getting at with, people not seeing the play being run, the Time magazine thing of how this is what they're going to start turning back on Christians. We need to do an episode on this, and I think we will at some point. You need to realize, and the Old Testament uses this phrase, it's a very valuable phrase, that the king surrounded himself with men who understand the times. Either you do or you don't. Either you get the play that's being run against Christianity, against liberty, against all kinds of different good, positive things in society, or you don't. And if you don't, the people that don't are going along unwittingly as tools of those, who will use these things against us. They are helping pave the way for that. Don't be that guy.
No, and it's emperor's new clothes. Nobody wants to be. We want to be friends with the world is really what it comes down to. We want to. No, that's not me. That's no, I don't believe those things.
We want to be accepted by them.
Exactly.
Right.
These people don't care about you. They hate you. We are to be hated. We will be hated by the world. We know that as Christians. And as you were talking about that, Jack, the understanding the times. You know what understanding the times is today? Conspiracy theorist. What we have to get away from. What we have to get away from is being afraid of terms.
That's another phrase.
Call me what you want. I don't care. Call me a conspiracy theorist. Oh, I can't possibly be one of those. So what? Christian nationalists. Well, I'm afraid of that too. We're afraid of so many terms. Homophobic. We are on the defensive all the time because all they got to do is throw out one tiny little phrase and they know that it melts us. Stop letting it melt you. Okay.
Win the phrase back.
Exactly. That's what we're looking to do here is reclaiming and I guess, really going back to what Christian nationalism used to be. And so what I would say, for our listeners is don't be afraid of the terms. We know the world will hate us. They are not our friends. We can't engender ourselves to them by accepting these or by cowering in fear if they call you a conspiracy theorist because you understand the times. You see these things that are happening. If they want to call you a Christian nationalist, take it back and say, okay. And what does that mean to them? Well, it means that if you push any Christian morals in any way other than living your individualized self, you're a Christian nationalist. Okay, then call me Christian nationalist. No, that doesn't. What they're going to do is they're going to push you to, so you support the January 6th riots. Oh, so you support, Nazism, neo-Nazism. You support white nationalism. You support racism. And they will always push you to the very nth degree and say, well, you support these things. No, reclaim the term. Well, absolutely, I don't support those things.
The biggest thing is that we like easy debates. We like, emotional things where again, you can drop one term and it's over. Mic drop, the whole thing's over. These issues aren't easy. This is not child's play. This is stuff you really have to think about. You have to read your Bible. You have to pray about. You have to converse and come to an understanding. I've been working on my understanding of government my entire adult life and am still changing, growing, evolving because you want to be pleasing to God and you want to advocate what he advocates. And this idea that you can come in and, I use one term, mic drop, it's all over. I guess you're just with the January 6th guys. Don't be that guy. Have nuanced discussion. Realize that things are not as simply won as, a line at a time. We've got to think through these things and think, what would God have us do? And that's the whole point of the Think Deeper podcast is, all right, here's this thing that you've heard about or these things people are talking about. Let's actually think a little deeper about it.
Yep.
Let's go into this and see. And so with Christian nationalism, take the term back, and explain it as just basically, and this is how I define it in the article. As I said a minute ago, we'll wrap up because we're running short on time here. Nationalism is just the expectation that a nation's rulers will do what is in the best interest of that nation. Not, imposing on everybody else, not, imperialism or any of those things, but just what's in the best interest of my people. That is not a controversial thing.
That's common sense.
Yeah, the governor of Texas has no business sitting at home thinking, how can I make life better for the people in Illinois? That's not his job. But we think that the president of the United States has that duty to everybody in the entire world. No. So, number one, the rulers of a nation are elected for the people under them to help improve their life and protect them from the evil. Punish the bad, praise the good. The Christian side of that is that the value set for which they should use to accomplish that is the Christian values as set forth by Jesus. That they are expected to kiss the Son, do homage to the Son of God, or he will be angry with them.
How is that bad?
It's
right.
Right. Now, again, there's a lot of bad things that people mean when they say Christian nationalism. Yeah, say I'm not for that either. I'm for this, the classic definition that Christians have held for about 1980 years, essentially. I mean, it really is. I mean, as far as I can tell, this is the standard definition through most of Christian history.
One thing I'll add to this again as we wrap up, there is a tendency, no matter what issue it is, to, if you have held a stance before in your past, again, this is just human nature, is that if you've held that stance, you are going to defend it to the nth degree, no matter what new information comes out. I'm going to challenge you as a listener, if that's you, if you're somebody who has held a particular view that you're not budging on whatsoever, I want to applaud people like Jack, for instance. Jack, I know you said you were a Christian anarchist not that long ago. Your views have changed. Your study of God's word has enlightened you to, hey, maybe I didn't have that 100% correct. And so, again, I want to challenge the listeners. If you are coming from a stance of, well, this is just the way it is, this is what I believe, and I'm going to defend it no matter what new information comes out, no matter what I study, that's not a good thing. We would encourage you to be willing to change. Open-mindedness is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're always looking to change your mind, but it means I might not have this 100% figured out. The study of God's word might reveal some new things for me. New information might come out. That's not a bad thing to go back and to change maybe a view that you've held forever.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And if you disagree, you might come out of this and go, no, they're just totally wrong. That's cool. In fact, I've got a friend, I think he's going to write something up, which I hope he does. He's a really sharp guy, a really great writer. Disagreed, and I want to see what he has to say. What I know he's not going to do is go, oh, you're just siding with the January 6th guys. Oh, you're on the road to Hitler. Don't do that. We need to be able to have these disagreements. And when we do disagree, as you said, have an open mind. And if you have an open mind, you come and go, it just doesn't add up for me. I think the scriptures say this. Articulate your belief. But we've got to stop straw manning each other, and
Yep.
and I hope we haven't done with
Yeah.
people that disagree with us, that some of the ideas we've cited. Yeah, I disagree with their commitment to critical social justice. I think that's bad. I think it's on a path that is not good for us at all. On the other hand, I know they're just trying to do what's pleasing to God in the way they see it. And so, as Christians, we have to be able to have these discussions. As you said, have an open mind. If you come to it and you still disagree, okay, but do so because of reasoning, not because of emotion, not because of buzzwords. Joe, anything to close us out there as we've kind of gone around the table?
No, I love it. I think that's exactly right. I don't have too much really that I would add to that other than it's difficult to do that. The easy thing is the straw man. The easy thing is the character assassination. And you touched on this point, Jack. Don't settle for the easy thing. Excuse me, these days. Like, go for the gusto, as they say.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's difficult to study this other person's point of view when you vehemently disagree. Have enough respect for your fellow man, and I want to do the same thing here. This is why I went and I read a ton of articles that I completely disagree with, but I want to know their side.
Right.
Not just to be able to pick it apart, but truly on the merits of it. What does their side say? Now, I still disagree with it, and that's my right. And like you said, people can disagree with us, but have enough respect for your fellow man to try to understand, to put yourself in their shoes. Where are they coming from?
Right.
Are they really an evil white nationalist, Christian nationalist jerk who believes in, that's the easy thing to believe. And you can go and sleep fine that night and look yourself in the mirror, and that's fine. But you know what? Do the hard thing. Try to understand where they're coming from. Try to remove the emotion from it and say, could there be something else that's here? It's going to be, if you go to research this and you Google white nationalism, or I keep mixing the two, I apologize, because they got mixed so much in the articles, everybody would equate them. But if you Google Christian nationalism, I can basically guarantee you that the first probably dozen pages on Google are going to be negative articles, negative things. Nobody's going to be looking at it. Take the time to try to dig into maybe your own beliefs on this. Try to find some positive spin on it. See if you agree. See if you disagree. Just We can get so caught up on one side of it. Let's try not to do that. I want to be that. I'm working on that myself, that it's easy for me to just look at something I disagree with and go, well, that's stupid. But somebody believes it for a reason, and maybe it is stupid, but I need to respect them enough to find out what they actually believe and why they believe what they believe, and to not call them names and to bash them and to straw man their argument and everything else. So I realized I said I had nothing to say, and I said that. But anyway, as we wrap up, I would just encourage her. You don't have to agree with us. As Jack said, you do not have to agree with us. We fully understand that, and we respect that. I would just say, try to do some research for yourself. That's something I'm going to continue to do on this subject. Will made a fantastic point about we want to be people who grow. We want to be people who think deeper. That's the point of this podcast. And but we just appreciate you listening if you made it to this point in the podcast, and for allowing us to have our say.
All right, so before we wrap up, we finish our weekly segment. What have you been preaching, teaching? We need a title for this segment.
I know, we got to come up with something.
Maybe some bumper music. No, I don't know. Anyway, I went first last week, so we're going to go with Joe this time. What you got?
Been teaching through James. Just started the book of James.
Great
and
book.
Something that hits me is those parallels. And I remember learning this in Bear Valley, and the more you look, the more you see the parallels between James and the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And that's just always fascinated me, that James is pretty much making the Sermon on the Mount, even though Sermon on the Mount is very applicable, but he's making it very applicable to early Christian life. And the thought is that James is the first book of the Bible, first written book of the New Testament, chronologically, somewhere in there. And so this is for young Jewish Christians who have not been Christians very long, and he takes them back to the Sermon on the Mount and just makes it very applicable in daily life. And there's so much wisdom to that. And the other thought is that it's kind of the Proverbs of the New Testament, just a bunch of sporadic, just sporadic pieces of wisdom throughout,
Sure.
right? And when you start to really connect, why does he move from one to the next? It just opens things up all the more. It's the same thing with Christ, Sermon on the Mount, the way he transitions from one to the next. So I'd encourage people, dig into James, try to find the parallels between, Matthew 5-7 and the book of James. It is a fantastic book with a lot of good wisdom in it, but also just a lot of good practical advice for how we ought to treat one another, going back to the words of Christ and through the brother of Christ there. So that's kind of my quick rundown.
Cool. I'll go
Very
next.
interesting.
What's that?
Go ahead. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So I've been doing a question and answer box. I think I mentioned before. People have been dropping in. I want to know about this. And previous to that, and I've been going on and off through the book of Mark, and we just kind of finished the middle of Mark, which is very much Jesus hitting the discipleship and taking up your cross and following him. And I preached through that, felt good about it, and I got a question in the box that said, what does it mean to take up your cross daily? And it hit me that, like, we as preachers, maybe those of us that have been steeped in the Bible, maybe you grew up in the church or whatever else, you hear these terms, you kind of know what it means, you just assume everyone knows what it means, and I just didn't think, like, I can't just throw that out there and say, all right, we got to take up our crosses, guys. Okay, so what does that mean?
Right.
And so what it does mean is, obviously it's an instrument of death. It's dying to yourself, and so it's to your own desires. In your marriage, you've got your own way. You really want your own way. There's that selfishness in our own heart. You die to yourself and say, I got to do it Jesus' way. I've got to put others above myself. I've got to serve. I've got to, do as he would have me do. In the workplace, you got to die. You have to say, I want mine. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to get my own. You die to yourself, and in your mind, your thoughts, your speech patterns, the way you are as a person, you have to die. And as Galatians 2 says, is I've been crucified with Christ. I think that's the best way to get it, is no longer I who lives, but Christ lives in me. It's every day putting a little more of yourself to death so that a little bit more of Jesus comes through. And so that's what I'm going to be preaching on this week. But more than anything, I was just fascinated of that question came out, and it's a reminder, I think, to me and to all of us in ministry. Break it down. Don't be worried about going too basic, because sometimes we got to get back to those foundations rather than assuming, rather than building on a foundation that maybe hasn't been set yet. Really explore what it means, because we all need that. It's where good Bible study starts, is to ask, okay, what does that mean?
It's great.
That's good.
Great. And that kind of ties in what I'm going through teaching right now, which I want to bring up something else that's just kind of my personal study. But we're teaching some fundamentals of Christianity right now at Decatur, and acts of worship is kind of what we're going through. Not just what are the acts of worship, but why do we teach it that way? Where is it in Scripture? Why do we, believe that those are acts of worship? So not a lot of new stuff there that I want to get into. Mine that is just kind of in my personal study, and I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I'm going to ask y'all, again, I know we got to do this quickly, but ask y'all's opinion. I'm in Acts 15. I've been studying through Acts over the last several months, and not the circumcision question. I'm not going to get into that, but the John Mark. Mm-hmm. When John Mark leaves Paul and Barnabas in Acts 14, they're right. Why do you think, and again, this is not going to be anything that I've learned, this is just opinion, I want to see what y'all think. Why do you think John Mark left? Because you clearly see in Acts 15, Paul is bothered by it, right? It upset Paul. He's like, we're not bringing this guy with us. You see Barnabas obviously wanted to. We learn in Colossians that they were related. I think it was that they were cousins. What do you think it was that caused John Mark to just say, you know what, I'm going to head back to Jerusalem, head home? It clearly wasn't something that was understandable because, again, it upset Paul. Paul's like, we're not bringing this guy with us again. What do y'all think? Any take on that? Again, it's in Acts 13, sorry, not 14, Acts 13:13 that John Mark actually leaves.
Right.
And then the conflict that takes place is in Acts 15. I know we got to do this quickly, but what do y'all think?
I mean, and it comes off as a desertion of, hey, we're working together, we're on a team together, and you quit the team. And I get that. I mean, if you've ever been a part of something where you're really leaning on each other and somebody just up and quits, the trust is destroyed. Yeah. It's deflating because, I mean, you think about how lonely, how on their own, how all they had was each other and of course Christ in those missionary journeys. And so for somebody to prove that they're not up to it, I mean, and it's hard work, mission work. I have not lived on a mission field. I guarantee it's very hard work, especially the travel, the persecution they were going under. And I think this is all speculation. I think for Paul it was, if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen.
Yeah.
That's my thought on it. No, that's my thought on it. Is it kind of got too real for Mark? Like it was too much, and he couldn't really handle it. That as Jack said, it's difficult being a missionary now in 21st century. I cannot begin to fathom how difficult that would be for them with everything they were going through, and for Mark to maybe, I always took it as just burnout.
Yeah.
That he just got burnt out. I don't know if that's exactly
could have been scared, could have been burnt out. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been anything. So that's just my personal thought on it.
It's all speculation, and that's the reason I wanted to ask. It's just interesting because we highlight that conflict, we highlight that division quite a bit, but to get down to, I wonder why it was that he left, and Paul calls him out in a positive manner later on in one of his letters. It's escaping me which one it is, but it's very interesting just to see that dynamic of conflict within three what seem to be very influential church fathers. So
what's even more interesting is getting into the difference between holding a grudge and being angry and upset. That's what's always fascinated me is, did Paul hold a grudge with John Mark in not allowing him to continue because him and Barnabas split? That's when he takes on Silas, right?
Right. And then it's a forgiveness issue. Yeah.
Right. Correct. So was Paul in sin for not immediately forgiving? And I think we have a very big misunderstanding of how forgiveness should come out. That's a different discussion. We'll get into that later, but
we'll do a podcast on that.
I was about to say, I think we've created about 8 new episodes within this one episode. Probably. But all the more reason to subscribe. Check us out on your podcast app. Starting with this episode, you might be seeing this on YouTube. We'll be putting them on YouTube again, podcast app. I know some of our listeners are not podcast app people. Go to focuspress.org. A pop-up will show up giving you the chance to subscribe by email. Every Wednesday, mostly Wednesdays, you'll be getting an email from us with our latest articles, but also the podcast every week where you can listen online on your computer, however you want to consume it. It will remind you that they're up. And so the best way to get us is your podcast app. Second best way is subscribe at focuspress.org to our emails. Be sure you've got that so you don't miss anything. I believe we talked about off air. Next week we're going to start in on a Christian theology of death. That should be a very interesting discussion. Very yeah, it should be one that's pretty challenging. So be sure to come back for that. Keep an eye out. If you are using a podcast app, leave us a rating. If you're on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe.
We would prefer 5 stars, but
Yes.
you know, it's whatever you
Yeah, a 5-star rating.
Will personally send you $20 to Amazon if you give us 5 stars.
I will.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Will's going to send it out.
Out of his own money.
Of course, I guess I was the billionaire last week, remember? So
Yeah,
That's right. He's got
That's
$1 billion in the bank.
that's
Yeah.
right. So, but yeah, leave us a review, like, subscribe, and we will talk to you guys next week.